Excellent. We're back.
Hello.
Hello. Hello, everyone watching. Welcome to We Need to Talk About Sunday, where we talk about what has happened last Sunday at Romsey Methodist Church. We've been a bit sporadic over the past few weeks with holidays and meetings and general adventures and shenanigans, but we're back now. Hopefully we'll be a bit more organised going forward. And we're here with John this evening to talk about Sunday service, which was the second in our series of Bible Month, looking at the Gospel of Mark. So we'll quiz you on some questions about that in a minute, John, and hope to have a good chat about some of the things that came up, because it was a really interesting service. I forgot to introduce us. I'm Jason.
I'm Joe.
There we go. And in the middle we have John. So, Joe, crack on.
Let's go for it. Yeah,
let's go for it. Let's talk about Sunday.
John, nice and straightforward. Jason's already kind of said, yeah, we're in Bible Month looking at Mark. But basically, in a nutshell, if you missed Sunday service, what was your main message? What was it all about?
Mark being a storyteller, and that was the structure of the gospel. And then the stories were very pertinent to people's lives. And the stories let people find out what they believed, what they understood from it. It didn't. Not all the dots were on top of the I's or the crosses on top of the T's, but you could sort out yourself from the truth in your experience.
It struck me because this idea of storytelling, which we'll probably come back and talk about a little bit later anyway, but it's interesting that obviously Mark is a storyteller, but that also that how much of Jesus's parables were as well. You know, he would put situations to the people that he was talking to in ways in which they would be able to relate to, and I thought that was just a really nice sort of coincidence. But maybe it's not a coincidence.
No, I think not, because essentially estimates that 90% of people couldn't read.
Yeah.
So the spoken word was the way in which people did hear the Bible. In fact, it's for the vast majority of the church's history, that's been the case, really.
Yeah. So, obviously, Mark's Gospel is the shortest of the Gospels. If it's missing so much detail, why are we spending this time at Bible Month looking at it? What's the point of looking at Mark?
No, it's a very good point, because, in fact, in preparation, apart from the Bible Month booklet, which takes a little bit of time to read, but not so long, and commentaries, I looked at videos from the Learning and Training Network of the Methodist Church. So there's a series of discussions from Adrian Rue, the regional organizer, and also by Professor John Drain, who, coming from Scotland, was looking at Mark. And the first question he asked in his series was, why do we have Mark? And in particular, because 90% of it is in Matthew, and the majority of it is also in Luke. So why do we need this other gospel? And it appears that Mark lost its popularity, became much less referenced once the church became a state-established church. So in other words, your clientele went towards those who were more likely to be turned on by cursive text. Yeah. So there's been a fair bit of criticism about Mark's poor Greek, and I share that I also have poor Greek and almost non-existent Greek. And so it's only relatively recently it's been thought again just to reinvestigate Mark as on its own basis rather than, if you like, the academic basis. And the apparently recent, not so last, 10 years or so, really a book which said that for the last 200 years, the biblical studies have not addressed Mark properly, because he should be seen as a provider of the spoken word.
Well, am I right in thinking that Mark was the first gospel, and the reason why Matthew and Luke have so much similarity to Mark is that they probably had access to Mark's text in order for some of those stories.
Almost I think 100% certain in many cases. Really, there's something like 616 verses of Mark are in Matthew, almost verbatim, and then there's another shared supposed book called Q or Keller, which is the source, and those are shared by Mark and Luke. And in fact, you can buy modern versions of Q, even though nobody ever knows Q existed. You can still buy the collections of these common verses, and these tend to be, in a sense, like much of Mark, where like almost 2 sentence snippets or two verse snippets, and then they're linked together in different ways, and in the other more cursive gospels.
Just the highlights, yeah.
It's an interesting question to bring up as well, Joe, because and what you're saying about sort of taking Mark more seriously, John, I find that really interesting, because certainly when I was trained to be a local preacher, Mark was the gospel we looked at. And I remember sort of reading some of the comments in the material in Faith and Worship about Mark, and sort of almost disparaging of kind of, it's not really all that detailed, and maybe some of it take with a pinch of salt. And I thought, oh, okay, that's not how I, certainly as an introduction to kind of reading and understanding Gospels as someone trained to be a preacher, that was very surprising to me. Yes. But I and frankly, I didn't necessarily agree with it. But hearing you talk about it now like that, actually, that's really interesting. And looking at it with fresh eyes is nice.
Well, one thing we just also said in these discussions was, if you think about, we're almost like a post-literate world. If you're used to sound bites, or you're used to 144 or 288 character statements, then Mark's your gospel. You got the pre-made Twitter.
I have to say, I really like Mark for that. I remember sort of the first time I guess I read it intentionally as a text, thinking about it as a literary thing rather than just a series of events in a book, of kind of the pace and the edit, because I guess it feels like a harsh edit, and it feels like it almost feels like it was written in a hurry, I think sometimes, although whether or not that's the case. But it is very intentional still, isn't it? It's a very as you pointed out on Sunday, that it's put together in a way to make you think, not just this happened. In
a sense, that's why I began by making this story of us, really, just to illustrate the pattern of what a story could be like. So that was my attempt to try to illustrate Mark's style.
And I wonder, because on Sunday we didn't have it on the screen, which was nice. It saved me a job. And you sort of said it was meant to be heard. I wonder, what do you think that we miss if we just read it? What do you think the danger is of treating it as a book rather than as something we hear?
Possibly, I think the danger is that you get too tied to the words and not the theatre. That's possibly the best way I can think to describe it, really. I remember once in Cambridge watching a fantastic Pinter play which had just come out, and the glorious set of actors, and the way they dealt with silence and move in a moving way was superb, really. And the sense to make it all cursive text is, it's almost as if you're getting towards the football results or something which is just a pattern that you want to read through to get to the end, and that clearly is that's an antithesis of what the book was probably about, I think, which was about, this is my message, and I'm going to tell you again and again, and you're going to, by the end you've got these messages, you better believe it, really.
Yeah, it got me really thinking as well about us as storytellers ourselves, as Christians who are trying to tell our own story as well as the story of God. And I sort of have been thinking about it ever since Sunday now, and that actually that's something I think we need to get better at, isn't it, across the board of being able to...
Sorry, Jason.
No, go on.
So many moons ago, before either of you were associated with our church, so many moons ago, I opened a sermon about it with a dream that I'd had, and to show how old it was about time when there was a Reagan-Gorbachev standoff, not Gorbachev, his predecessor standoff, and Brezhnev, and my dream was I was away for work. That's out of the country. That's not so unusual, and I had wanted to get back because of the impending disaster, and I woke up because I was stuck at Gatwick Airport and I couldn't get from Gatwick to Hampshire, and that woke me up. And that's the story. And somebody years after said, "We basically don't remember anything else I said probably, but that message, that image, they could still remember years later." And so Mark's track record is probably very good at making people remember these images years after, really, and changing people.
Yeah, and we've talked about on here before, haven't we, about trying to remember that when we're reading the Bible, it's not, these are real people. These are events that happened to real people that had thoughts and feelings, and there's emotion throughout it, and it's easy to treat them all as imagery or images, or sort of straw men almost, I guess, when actually they are real people. And I think actually the passage we had on Sunday is a great example of that, of these two very they're healings, but actually they're very human, aren't they?
Yes.
And I think
Linda brought it out very well in the reading, really, which really made it. Yes, they are. The business, again, one of the things that picked up was that in the reading, well, it was fine for Jairus' daughter because he was a main figure. He was a man. He could go to, without any problem, he could go and address the visiting important teacher. The lady who had nothing, nobody could speak for her. Therefore, she should not speak in those environments. But she touched instead, really. I think that's a deeply moving story, that one.
It was great to see the contrast of both healings. For everything that you drew out of that, John, the illness and age versus sort of purity and youth, and Mark must have known what he was doing in terms of putting those two stories together. I mean, I don't know what sort of time frame it was in terms of him visiting, but to pull that into one story, to highlight that, I'm sure that was done purposefully.
Absolutely. There's one of the old fathers of the early fathers of the church said that actually Mark wrote his gospel having written down everything that Peter said, but he didn't know in which order it was provided. Some people doubt that actually that was what happened, and they certainly probably wasn't written in Rome. I think that from what I've looked at and thinking about it, it's been Mark this year really, because we've had Mark as the lectionary carrier for quite a bit of the year. I had not lodged in my poor little brain enough that how much of this was set in north of the Galilee, how much of it was in the Gentile territory. The verses nearby, it says that Jesus went up the region of Tyre, which is a fair strip off from Galilee. So he was really seeding, I think, the people who are listening to the gospel in those areas, that Jesus was there. He understood what the place was like, and these are the stories that we have of Jesus there, and the authority that he had in that land as well as in his own land, in inverted commas. Because there will still be, for example, Caesarea Philippi was actually called Caesarea after the emperor, but Paneas after the god Pan. So that was the town god was Pan. So you had your town god. So the fact that Jesus, in a sense, is showing he's has much more authority than just being a town god. He's all over the place in a literal sense.
And so with those two parts of the stories, you obviously drew upon this significance of 12, this number being quite sort of biblical. And I just wondered, sort of, obviously it was quite obvious in those two stories, but you were sort of saying that obviously 12 has a lot of sort of biblical history to it and biblical significance. And I just wondered, is that relevant to us? And is it something that we need to be aware of or even care about? The significance of 12?
I think that's the thing about stories, isn't it? You find the truth that hits you. In one sense, saying on that interpretation for those who weren't there on Sunday, it was that the value of 12 could be related to the 12 tribes of Israel, and the number 12 came in two different ways: the age of Jairus' daughter, and the number of years that the poor woman had been hemorrhaging. So in one sense, could you link that, in fact, if Israel is represented by the 12, was Israel, in a sense, dying? Was it hemorrhaging? And other people then would say in two different possible ways. It's because the Romans are there, and on the other side would be those people in Mark's congregations would say, yes, they need to be reawakened, and Jesus is the way in which they can be reawakened. It gets more difficult the previous story across into the Gentile territory when the spirit's called Legion, kind of Roman reference, of the evil spirits, and the pigs, which were representative of the Roman soldiers, are driven into the sea. There will be people in Jesus' time and beyond, especially considering this time was when it was written, was about the time when the Romans had just trashed Jerusalem, or about that time. Then there was a slightly contrary feeling to the Romans throughout the land, really.
So really, it's just this sort of significance, specifically to the stories that we heard on Sunday, and how that could relate to the circumstance with which the culture was in at that time. But it's not something that we need to be more aware of when reading throughout the Bible elsewhere, or
I don't know. It depends on how you take the stories. Is the story just about the individual actions of Jesus and how we believe individually, or is it about our collective actions as well? And you could say it does. Is it possible the country could be an ailing country, that it is not following perfection, and that it could be that Jesus could be the reawakening that's needed in the country?
But and to add to that, we kind of we have a whole Bible in a sense, don't we? And
Yes.
We yes, and 12 obviously links back to the 12 tribes of Israel, so that can be representative of Israel. But that is a theme throughout a lot of the Bible. It's not just a Mark thing, is it? And we looked at Revelation, and of course 12 is all over Revelation,
Sure.
for exactly the same reason, because it's symbolic of the same kind of things, really. At the very least, even if writers not sort of leaning into the 12 as being overly, this is what it definitely represents, it's at least a hook, isn't it? It's at least a theme that kind of, actually that this text doesn't stand alone. We need, and actually bits, or actually the text perhaps doesn't make sense without Deuteronomy, and perhaps Revelation doesn't make sense without Mark. And that kind of completeness of the Bible, I think, is quite important. So even if you don't need to sort of care about the numerology and the actual number 12, I think you do need to care about the fact that the writers are making an effort to connect it all together.
Yes, I'm sure that's true. Yeah.
John, you also spoke about a terminology that you used, and I forget where you said that you'd picked it up from, but as soon as
Bible
I say
monthly.
it,
It's the Bible month booklet.
so you mentioned about contagious holiness, and that was
Yes.
just something that I thought, for anyone who missed Sunday, I just wondered if you could kind of give us a definition for what you mean by that, and kind of give us an insight into that.
Yeah, so since Sunday, I've read a book by Tom Stuckey. It'll be out soon. It was a pre-read of the text before he submits it probably at the end of the month. And then he gives the definition of holiness, which is a separateness, something which is distinct. At the same time I first saw this, there was some sort of YouTube channels and somebody that came across the contagious influences. So it says people who have a big, for very reason, the influences are saying, "Well, we bring you the great truth," and then it wanted to be transferred and seeded to other people. The point I was trying to make there was it's a bit like the image of the salt and the earth, that we being the salt and we being the light. That it says that living by these truths, these powers of perhaps powers isn't the right word. These truths of being in awe of God, and also the pivotal importance of justice. Back to Micah, and that these are the things that if we live by and are authentic by the way we do it, can be contagious. It's a bit like the extravagant welcome, extravagant generosity of I guess something that our church has been trying to embody really. It's along the same sort of lines that you, in faith, you're naturally trying to live the thing as best you can, and because you know there's forgiveness available. Then if you make a mistake, then you know you're not necessarily completely smitten to the end of all time. I forgot what I was going to say now, really. I'm sure it would be better if I'd worked it out beforehand.
No, I get I totally get what the concept of contagious holiness is. I was wondering if you could kind of, how did that relate to the stories that we heard of in Mark's Gospel this week? Or was it just simply that went along with your message that of storytelling?
That's a good question. To be honest, I didn't really work it out that way. I think it probably the closest I can say was that the effect of Jesus' mission in that northern area was that he brought something, an authority. He brought a aspect of love and openness, a breaking down of barriers, which was definitely part of his mission, and that was contagious. Those acts of holiness spread.
I made a few notes on Sunday, as I often do, in preparation for the podcast, and the thing that I've noted down under this kind of contagious holiness title is this idea of sickness needing healing, and sort of trashingness of God's garden needing tending to. And so this idea that good isn't going to come without sort of something an evil to overcome, if that makes sense.
It does, but I think we don't have to look far for evil.
No. Yeah, I guess that's my point. Is that we are obviously in a very broken world,
yes,
and that we're not going to see signs of this contagious holiness without, unless we intervene into these situations, which of course there are so many of.
that's right, and that's one danger is being overwhelmed by the scale of the problem as you look at these things, and so. Even in this lecture I gave last week in Manchester, one of the questions I was asked in the discussion was, "Where do you find hope?" Having talked about climate issues, there has to be an element of hope. We all, as human beings and as religious people, hope is important. It's a driver, really, and so to be able to see. In a sense, the contagious holiness is an aspect of hope that you're saying, well, we know this isn't right, but we believe, that is our hope, that we will be able to spread the holiness.
That's great. I think I've got it now. Thanks, John.
And I guess also, because I sort of tying a couple of bits together, I bring it back to justice.
Yeah.
Both of it strikes me, one of the things that stood out to me in this passage is that these are, depending on who you are, these are people that don't matter. In Roman, first century Roman culture, little girls don't matter all that much. Same for first century Jewish culture to an extent. That little girls don't matter all that much. Old women, didn't matter that much, but here is Jesus taking a stand and saying, actually, no, these people matter. They matter to me, and they're there to matter to you.
Yes.
And I think that's part of our being having contagious holiness is of being able to communicate a worldview that is better. It's not just. It's not just here's an idea that we've got. It's actually, look, this is a better way of doing things, and you can experience and be a part of a better world, and you can take steps to do that now. And that, okay, maybe we're not going to raise little girls from the dead, and maybe we're not going to heal women in that way, but we can, the way we are with people in our relationships now, the way we talk to people and think of people. I mean, I always struggle with this because I know that in my context, I don't deal with sexism very often. And I remember I was talking to Sam about this in a week, actually, that I remember one time I went away and I was spending time with the kinds of people I don't normally spend time with. And the way that they talked about women, I just could not believe it. I couldn't understand it. But actually, that is, I think, a perfect example of where we can take this contagious holiness of here is who Jesus says matters, and how we can then, in a situation like that, speak into it and change it for the better.
Yes, I completely agree, Jason. And in the two contiguous stories, those ones and the ones before, Jesus is crossing this other barrier between the Gentiles and the Jewish fatherland, if you like. That's an inappropriate phrase to use, but in the circumstances. But so I think, as I said on Sunday, what offends me is the way that the tendency is to corral people into groups, give them a label, and then dismiss them and make them valueless. To me, if you want to look for evil, there's a good representation of what you're doing. Yeah. You're dehumanizing people, and you're giving yourself an excuse, and some unsavory people excuses to treat them less than they should be, and certainly not the way that Jesus would have treated them.
Sorry. So we've got a completely changing the subject. Because we thought we'd ask whether you wanted to share any eco church updates with us, because John is our eco. For those that everyone knows, John is our eco church czar,
eco warrior.
Wow, yeah, but also I know you do an awful lot outside of just Romsey, don't you on this, and just thought it'd be a good opportunity to share some of what's been going on that front, if you're happy to do so.
Guess I'll try what to say. I mean, obviously, one of the crucial things at present which is going on is the Young Christian, the Young Climate YCC. I've forgotten their march, which just started from Cornwall to go to Glasgow. So they're presently going through bits of Cornwall. It started at the weekend, and these are marked. And there are periods in our area around third week in July when they will be going through from Salisbury to Broughton to through to Winchester. So there'll be opportunities to be involved in the march or help support the people who are going through that. We are having our own Climate Sunday service on the 22nd. 22nd. Oh, that's the relay. Well, YCCN. Thank you, Young Christian Climate Network. Our own Climate Sunday service will be towards the end of the period when there will be a national service on the 5th of September. And this is asking people to commit, and the committing that they want people to do is to take a discipline of examining their own ways of worshipping and living and relating to the world via Eco Church, something that we've been doing for the last 5 years. Also to make a commitment to a cause, and that is to sign up to a declaration that means you support climate change as being a prime issue for the government, not just climate change, but the environmental issues in total. Those are two of the three main things. I'm trying to search my brain for what the third one is. So that's one thing. The number of eco churches is growing, and it was recognised that in fact people need some more advice, and so there are advisors network on two streams on buildings and also on nature conservation, which people can get advice directly from A Rocha through their website. The Methodist churches in the conference in the very end of June, it will debate a response to a memorial from last year on climate issues. And there are two strands that they're looking at. That is the divestment of investment in fossil fuel activities, companies. And the second will be that the churches should embrace targets of climate zero by 2030 as an aspirational target. It's going to be seen to how the church is going to work out how to tell people how to do that. Well, the hint is that you actually should go to people like A Rocha, which already exist, rather than Methodism trying to reinvent a smaller wheel than's already there.
You could say there's an opportunity for contagious holiness.
I would say so, yes. I might be contagious.
Thank you very much.
if not holy.
And of course, and I know that John wouldn't mention it without, but Stewarding Precious Earth YouTube channel is really good, so go subscribe to that as well. I'll stick a link in the comments as well for that, because there's been some really interesting videos actually popping up on there.
Next one's nitrous oxide. Then I've done the major gases which actually cause global warming. It's one of these insidious things. It lasts for 300 years as a half-life, and that's pretty ferocious. But also, it's there long enough that it can get up to the stratosphere, and it's now overtaken the CFCs as the biggest eater of the ozone hole. These things you wouldn't have expected to be correlated for completely different mechanisms, but we're better without them. Or better with them. Some of these things are natural, like the amount of ozone which is around. There should be some ozone in the lower atmosphere, but just not nearly as much as there is. It's getting all about the garden being in balance. You've got the right ingredients to the right amount in the right places.
Well, great. Thank you so
you.
much.
Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah. Thanks for your message on Sunday, John. And thanks for joining us this evening.
Yes, I was of two minds. I nearly shared the thing about Bible Month, but I won't, because I don't know how much of it future preachers are using, and I don't want to ruin other services, so I won't do that. But maybe at the end I will.
Yes.
But thank you, John. We're looking. It's Gareth's service next week. On the next one, which we're carrying on with Mark. Excellent.
The Sunday after I'm in Alsford, Climate Sunday service.
Oh, of course. Oh, is it Climate Sunday and Mark? Are you having to?
No, they're not doing Bible Month. I have no idea.
What?
Not the same time as us.
No.
I'll ask them when I get there what they're doing about Bible Month.
But Bible Month always makes me chuckle, is it? Because the other months of the year we just don't go near the Bible, do we?
It's so easy to deal with 4 chapters in one service.
Yes, you did. Yes, yeah, it's tricky. Actually, that's a good point. Quickly before we wrap up, if anyone hasn't been, Mark is short. It's a nice, easy book to read and just pick up. And I know we talked about hearing it rather than reading it, but it's an easy gospel to get through. If you do have the opportunity to read through it alongside the services this month, I think you'll find it worthwhile.
Yep, certainly.
Yeah. Well, I'll end with a prayer, and then we'll stop. Father God, we thank you for John and his message, the message that you brought to us through him on Sunday, Lord. We are inspired. I'm inspired. I hope that it inspires many more people, that you would help us to see where we can bring contagious holiness, where we can show people a better way, where we can be the better way in our community, in our planet, for the environment, and just with the people that we meet. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching, folks.
Yes, thanks for watching, and we'll be back at some point.
You sure?
Cheerio.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Bye.